my name is Rebecca O'Banion, and I'm going to talk to you today about interpersonal communication and specifically about listening. So today in the presentation, I'm going to identify an overarching goal for my life. I'm going to define enlarging the conversation as it relates to reaching my overarching goal. I'm going to describe my personal background and behavioral blend. I will define potential barriers to my interpersonal context. I will identify and provide solutions to noise pollution. And finally, I will develop a plan of action to improve my interpersonal communication skills and inviting others to join in the conversation. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'm going to start by just talking about my overarching goal. Specifically for me, sometimes I feel like that I talk more than I listen, and so as a result, my overarching goal is to become a good listener, and I think as a result of that, my professional and personal relationships will improve. So if you'll go to the next slide, we're going to talk about what it means to listen. So Peterson says we have little chance of changing our behavior unless we can calmly observe it. Improving communication skill depends on being able to accurately identify what we are doing so we can choose other options if they are needed. So specifically, I'm going to start by asking for feedback from others and trying to be aware of my own behavior and ask open-ended questions and truly analyze myself. So specifically, how do we listen better? If you'll go to the next slide, we're going to talk about that. First of all, we use proper facial expressions and gestures when we're listening to make sure that the person realizes that we're aware of what they're saying and really pay attention to the spoken word instead of thinking about what we might want to say next. I'm going to reflect on what has been said. In order to truly listen, I think that I need to stay unbiased until the person has finished talking and truly focus on what they're saying and really be sensitive in my responses, encourage others to be open in their communication with me, and avoid the temptation to send meta messages. And I think that is really important as we learn to listen better. So what do I think listening is specifically going to do for me? If you'll go to the next slide, I think listening is going to enlarge my conversation and truly make my relationships more meaningful and my conversations meaningful. Enlarging one's conversation can be defined simply as making an effort to analyze personal communication patterns and make choices that involve others in meaningful ways. And certainly listening is critical for me in that, and that's something that I desire to do. So we're going to talk about my personal background. So if you'll go to the next slide, what is my personal background? Well, I think our identity is definitely defined as a constellation of features or labels that establish social expectations that we have of ourselves and others. And the combination of life experiences, our personalities, and our social interactions create a blend, a very unique blend that ultimately becomes our identity. And so my personal background, I am the youngest of four, and so I think that has specifically influenced me by making me have to fight sometimes to be heard and truly work for everything that I have. And that's definitely a part of the overall person that I am and my identity. So let's move on to the next slide, and we're going to talk specifically about giftings, because in addition to our life experiences, our identity is also made up of the giftings that God has given us. And we studied the DISC model of personality profiles, and in this model, people are divided into 4 types, either D, I, S, or C. And so people, although you may have a dominant trait, your identity is made up of a blend of several, and so the mixture of those traits becomes our behavioral blend. So what is my behavioral blend? If you'll go to the next slide, I was not at all surprised to find out that my dominant trait is D, and that makes me very task-oriented and determined to get the job done, but I also have a very strong I trait, which makes me a motivator and tend to be an effective leader. So I still have a tendency toward leadership, and I have the ability to get others to follow through communication and energizing those around me. So what are some of the influencers in my conversations? If you'll go to the next slide, we all have both positive and negatives. I've mentioned the positives already, the ability to energize those around me. Some of the negatives for me is that I tend to be more task-oriented, industrious. I tend to talk more than I listen, and I tend to think about what I'm going to say next instead of truly listening to what people are saying. So what are some of the potential barriers for me? If you'll go to the next slide. As I think toward reaching my overarching goal, I think some of the barriers are self-centeredness, which for me is unintentional, but I just tend to not think about what others are thinking. I think significantly for me, one of the barriers is attempting to avoid overload. We're just constantly bombarded with messages from people all around, and so I think sometimes I lose focus and just block out everyone. And then also fast thinking, and Stewart states, since it's harder to concentrate on another person's ideas than it is to focus on our own, we often take the easy way out and spend our free time thinking about our own concerns. And so I think that's a barrier for me, and certainly a concern. So how do I overcome these? If you'll go to the next slide, I think I just make a conscious effort to put other needs above my own, and I really make an effort to filter unnecessary messages so that I can leave room for the things that are truly important, and then just make an effort to think slowly as people are communicating to me. We also have some internal and external noise pollution that can become a problem when we attempt to listen. So if you'll go to the next slide, we're going to look at some of the internal noise pollution, and that's what can also be called as self-talk. And self-talk is just ongoing dialogue that you have with yourself that determines your behavior. So specific messages I send myself, if you'll go to the next slide. I think sometimes one of the messages that I tell myself is that what I have to say is more important than what someone else might have to say. I think sometimes I play the should game of what should I have done, and focus on that instead of just moving forward. And then also I think the root of some of it is just an inflated self-image and just feeling like the things that I have to say are more important. So what are some of the external messages? If you'll move to the next slide, definitely too much information coming in at one time, negative information, that if someone is constantly being negative, I tend to just totally filter anything that that person might have to say. And then anger on the part of others, I think, is also one of those things that is noise pollution for me. So what is my plan of action? If you'll go to the next slide, my personal plan of action to reach my overarching goal of becoming a better listener is to focus more on the needs of others, concentrate on the unnecessary messages around me, use body language and facial expression to communicate interest to others, and then repeat what has been said to me so that people will know that I've listened. I'm excited about the opportunity to focus on interpersonal communication, and I'm excited about reaching my overarching goal. Thank you.